Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. The humans have hindered the Council's progress long enough, Tyrcol leader Vorkos snarled, his guttural voice reverberating through the high-domed hall. His black, slitted eyes gleamed as he surveyed the gathered representatives. His crimson exoskeletal armor, adorned with jagged gold sigils of conquest, caught the cold light, a stark contrast to the sterile elegance of the chamber. They stall negotiations. They weaken our position. They cling to the outdated fantasy that peace alone breeds prosperity. Chancellor Jose McNulty clenched his fists. His stance was firm, despite the storm of murmurs echoing through the chamber. We do not stall. We uphold the integrity of the civilizations that do not have the power to defend themselves. Your kind seeks conquest under the guise of unity, and now you expect the Council to stand aside while you trample on their rights? A low, rolling growl spread across the Tyrcol delegation. Vorkos smirked. A race that cannot defend itself does not deserve to exist. The words sent a ripple of discomfort through the Council representatives. Some exchanged uneasy glances, others remained stone-faced. But McNulty noticed it, the flicker of amusement in the eyes of several consuls. Some had already chosen a side. You're asking for permission to invade sovereign systems, including human colonies, McNulty said, his voice like steel. And that is something we will never allow. Vorkos' smirk widened, revealing sharp, predatory teeth. Allow? He let out a low, rumbling laugh. The Council is no longer shackled by your ideals, human. That was the mistake of the past. He turned his gaze toward the center of the hall, where the newly appointed High Chancellor, a serpentine Zendari named Vos Talvek, observed from his elevated throne. Talvek's luminous green eyes were unreadable, his sleek, scaled form coiled within the golden embrace of the speaker's seat. In the past, the Council intervened, Talvek said, his voice smooth, measured. We believed mediation was the best course of action. That belief proved misguided. McNulty felt the weight of inevitability in those words. We will no longer play arbiter to your conflicts, Talvek continued, his tone final. Humans and Tyrcol must resolve their differences amongst themselves. Silence fell over the chamber. McNulty's grip on the polished railing in front of him tightened. And what do you suppose that will lead to? His voice was low, dangerous. Vorkos' smirk faded, his tone turning cold. Victory. A sharp metallic sound echoed as Vorka turned on his heel, his honor guard following in perfect unison. The chamber doors hissed open, and the Tyrcol delegation strode out, their crimson banners trailing behind them. McNulty exhaled, slow and controlled. He turned his head slightly toward the man standing at his side. Admiral. Caleb Reiser kept his presence imposing, and his eyes locked on the Tyrcol as they departed. His voice was barely above a whisper. They never came here to debate. McNulty nodded. No, they came to make it clear they don't need permission anymore. The murmurs around the chamber swelled, some representatives hurriedly conversing with aides, others quietly leaving through the side exits. The room was shifting, aligning itself to the new reality. Then, the holographic display snapped to life, its sudden glow washing over the chamber like a silent detonation. The murmurs died instantly. Every eye turned toward the shimmering projection as the distorted feed flickered, stabilizing into sharp clarity. A fleet, 6 human warships, positioned in formation, orbiting just outside the Council's station, engines steady, hulls gleaming under the void's cold light. The insignia of the United Earth Defense was bold against the steel-gray plating, a silent but unmistakable presence. Then, without warning, the first explosion bloomed. A blossom of silent fire erupted from the forward section of the Argonaut, the flagship. Its hull split in an instant, molten metal spraying outward in shimmering arcs. The ship lurched violently, her bow shearing off as a second blast ignited along her spine. McNulty barely had time to register the destruction before the next ship was hit. The Olympia, caught mid-maneuver, crumpled as a column of plasma fire speared through its core. The light from the blast reflected off the chamber walls, the flickering projection searing itself into the faces of every diplomat present. One by one, the ships were torn apart, their hulls shredded by barrages of concentrated fire. Wreckage spun through the void, trailing embers and bodies, human bodies, weightless and lifeless, drifting in the cold silence of space. Among the debris, fragments of uniforms fluttered aimlessly, insignias torn and scorched beyond recognition, the last remnants of those who had come in peace and met only fire. The fleet was not just destroyed, it was erased. McNulty's breath locked in his chest. Reiser's fists clenched at his sides. His voice, when it came, was taut with barely restrained fury. Those are our people. The final detonation swallowed the screen in a cascade of fire and debris. Then, darkness. For a moment, the chamber was deathly still. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the murmurs began, hushed, uncertain. Some delegates leaned forward, their faces stricken. Others remained eerily composed, their expressions unreadable. But no one stood. No demands for justice, no calls for retaliation. Just silent, passive acceptance. McNulty scanned the room, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Some of them had known. A Zendari delegate, lips pressed together in a faint, almost amused smirk. An insectoid from the Suvarek Union whispered to a colleague, neither of them looking surprised. They had expected this. McNulty's stomach twisted in something far colder than rage. They had let this happen, and then, before anyone could react further, the hologram flared back to life. A new figure emerged. Vorka. He stood on the bridge of his dreadnought, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. The glow of weapons fire pulsed in the background, illuminating the metallic ridges of his crimson exoskeletal armor. When he spoke, his voice slithered through the chamber's speakers, smooth and poisonous. "I believe we have found our solution, Chancellor." McNulty's hands curled into fists. Vorka's smirk widened. "We settle this like warriors, not weaklings hiding behind words." He gestured casually behind him, where the dying embers of the human fleet still flickered. "This is how warriors speak, Chancellor. Come and prove you understand the language, if you dare." And with that, the transmission cut. The chamber was left in suffocating silence. No protests, no outrage, just the faint hum of the projector and the charred ghosts of 6 human warships lingering in the minds of those who had just witnessed their destruction. McNulty turned to Reiser. The Admiral's face was stone, but his jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. Reiser's voice was quiet, deadly. "They didn't just fire on our ships, they sent a message written in fire." McNulty nodded, his voice low and steady. "And now we send ours." As the heavy doors sealed behind them, the distant murmur of the council chamber faded. McNulty pressed forward, his stride determined, Reiser following close behind, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. Footsteps echoed behind them, quick and steady. Sadie Franco had been quiet throughout the session, watching, listening. Now she wasn't waiting any longer. She was one of McNulty's senior diplomatic aides, sharp-minded and relentless, with a talent for reading between the lines of political theater. Unlike most diplomats, she didn't deal in pleasantries. She dealt in truths people didn't want to hear. And what she had just witnessed in that chamber had set every alarm in her mind blaring. "They knew," she said, her tone sharp. McNulty and Reiser stopped. She didn't need to explain who they were. Some of them knew days ago, she continued, her dark eyes locked on McNulty's. Reiser didn't wait. "We're leaving." His voice was low but firm. "We'll talk on Cydonia." McNulty met his gaze. Reiser was right. The Council's station was compromised. Cydonia, the United Earth Defense's primary command center in orbit, was secure. "Move," McNulty ordered. They walked fast, their footsteps echoing in the wide corridors. Behind them, the whispers of the Council grew distant. No one followed. The flight to Cydonia was brief, but the weight of what had just transpired stretched every second. The moment McNulty, Reiser, and Sadie stepped onto Cydonia's deck, the energy was entirely different. This was no diplomatic chamber. This was a war room. Holographic displays hovered over the main console, each showing tactical updates, fleet deployments, and surveillance feeds. Officers moving with precision, their voices sharp, their urgency controlled. Rob Steger, Chief Strategic Officer, turned the moment they arrived. "We've been monitoring Council chatter. Something's shifting, but no official word." Aidan Elwes, standing near the tactical display, grimaced. "We've got confirmed fleet movements near the outer colonies. Tyrcall warships are forming up along multiple vectors." McNulty folded his arms. "They're wasting no time. I spoke with a few delegates before the session. Something felt off," Sadie murmured, her voice low. "The Zendari representatives barely looked me in the eye. The Suvarek delegate kept avoiding direct questions about Council security. And then there's the Threxians." She hesitated, eyes darting between McNulty and Reiser. One of them slipped. McNulty's gaze sharpened. "Go on." "He asked me when humanity planned to withdraw from the Council." Reiser exhaled sharply. "They expected us to walk away." Sadie nodded, like the decision had already been made for us. Steger's voice was tight. "Because it has." He pointed at a new tactical feed. "Tyrcall forces aren't just mobilizing, they're positioning." The display shifted, showing a growing red mass of ships, battle cruisers, assault carriers, and their signature wedge-shaped dreadnoughts. Their fleet was preparing for war. But this wasn't the beginning. This had been planned long before the first shot was fired. Beyond the human sensors, in the heart of the Tyrcall formation, Vorka stood on his bridge, watching. His fleet stretched before him, engines burning against the void. This wasn't just preparation. It was the inevitable strike. "Status," he demanded. His second-in-command, Commander Jekyll, turned, his exoskeletal plating clicking as he moved. "All primary fleets are assembled. The forward strike groups await orders." Vorka bared his teeth in satisfaction. "Good. Position them along the Theta Expanse and the Calreth corridor. We will draw the humans in." Jekyll hesitated. "And if they do not take the bait?" Vorka's mandibles twitched. "They will. Before or after we burn their colonies, but they will." A low growl of approval rippled through the bridge crew. "Send our scout ships to harass the outer settlements," Vorka continued. "Push them toward engagement. The moment their fleets move, we crush them." Jekyll bowed his head slightly. "It will be done." Vorka turned back to the viewport. The Council had given them free rein. Now the only thing left was to tear humanity apart. Back on Cydonia, the Tyrcall fleet movements flashed across the main display. Red markers pushed aggressively toward key human colonies. Reiser's voice was iron. "They're not waiting for diplomacy, they're baiting us." Elwes scrolled through the interface, pulling up early warning signals from outer systems. "We're detecting minor skirmishes, hit-and-run attacks. Low scale now, but it won't stay that way." Steger leaned in, squinting. "They're pushing for a response. They want to force us into a fight on their terms." Reiser straightened. "Then we don't give them what they want." He turned to his command officer. "Activate full fleet readiness. Pull every available warship into defensive positions. Any ship still docked? Get it prepped. Now." Elwes nodded and relayed the orders. The room became a storm of movement. War had begun, whether the Council wanted to acknowledge it or not. McNulty turned to Reiser. "I'm going back to the Council." Reiser met his gaze. Good call. If there's still anyone in that room who isn't bought, we need them to start talking. McNulty exhaled. And if there's no one left? Reiser's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we make damn sure we don't need them. McNulty gave a small nod before turning to Sadie. We leave in 5. Reiser faced the main display. His voice was level, cold. Send detachments to every colony in the Tyrcol attack corridor. Someone out there has information, and we need it. An officer saluted. Yes, sir. As McNulty and Sadie left the war room, the display above them updated again. The Tyrcol fleet was still moving, and soon, so would humanity's. On the systems menaced by the Tyrcol, the exodus had begun. Reports flooded into Sidonia's war room, small vessels, refugee convoys, entire populations abandoning their home systems. Minor races, once content to live in the shadow of the Council's power, were now fleeing en masse, running for their lives. Elwes, eyes locked on the tactical display, muttered, "They're not evacuating contested territories. They're leaving everything behind." Reiser exhaled sharply. They know what's coming. Sadie Franco's sadness was clear in her voice. News like that spreads like fire. McNulty scanned the names of the fleeing civilizations. The Volnari, the Kathir, the Adrasi, races that had always been cautiously neutral in the Council's power struggles. Now their distress signals flared across human space, pleading for humanitarian corridors, safe passage, anything that would get them away from the expanding shadow of the Tyrcol fleets. Reviewing the intercepted messages, Sadie looked up abruptly. They're not asking for help. They're not asking for asylum. They're just running. McNulty's stomach twisted. These species had lived under the rule of stronger empires for centuries. They had learned how to survive, when to submit, when to fight, and most importantly, when to leave before the killing started. Reiser turned to Steger. Tell me what we have on fleet movements. Steger worked the controls swiftly, pulling up a real-time overlay of Tyrcol fleet movements. Most of their forces are converging around key colony worlds. Expected. He zoomed out. But we're missing pieces. Red markers indicated Tyrcol fleet positions, clustering dangerously close to major human settlements. But elsewhere, in less significant regions, the patterns became erratic. Entire formations had disappeared from long-range scans. Some warships altered course and then vanished entirely into sensor dead zones. McNulty's brow furrowed. We can track the fleets moving toward the colonies, but what about the others? Where did they go? Elwie's expression tightened as he reviewed the data. Some of them just dropped off. No signals, no trajectory projections. It's like they're just gone. Reiser's jaw tightened. That's not a retreat. This is something else. Before anyone could speak, an encrypted signal pinged through the command center, high priority, unknown origin. Sir, an officer snapped toward Reiser. Put it through. The hollow projector flared to life, static crackling through the transmission. A Volnari materialized, tall and sinewy, his pale, iridescent skin shifting subtly under the dim light. His elongated features and multi-lensed eyes flicked left and right, scanning as if expecting the transmission to be cut at any moment. His voice was low, clipped, urgent. My name is Jahak of the Volnari. I don't have much time. McNulty and Reiser exchanged a sharp look. They came to us first, Jahak continued. The Tyrcol. They offered us a choice. Serve them, or be exterminated. His throat flexed in something like a grimace. Most accepted. Sadie stepped forward. And those who didn't? Jahak's skin changed to multiple colors. McNulty already knew the answer before the alien spoke again. They were erased. A chill settled over the war room. Jahak's color changed to a hue of red. They don't see us as a threat. They don't even see humans as a threat. The Council will do nothing. By the time they react, the war will be over. Reiser's voice was cold. They think we're already dead. Jahak leaned forward, voice desperate. I don't care what you do, Chancellor. I don't care if you burn their fleets to dust or flee into the void, but if you don't act now, there won't be a fight left to win. McNulty's tone was steady. Tell me what you know. Jahak hesitated, then continued. One of our refugee convoys fled through the outer systems. They spotted Tyrcol fleets surrounding 2 uninhabited planets near a colony sector. No movement. No broadcasts, just waiting. His colors changed again. They weren't taking ground. They were holding position. That's why I risked contacting you. Sadie's brow furrowed. That's why they disappeared from our scans. They're not moving toward the colonies. They're waiting. Reiser turned back to the tactical map, gaze locked on the growing red swarm of Tyrcol fleets. McNulty straightened, his decision made. I'm leaving. Reiser nodded once. Go. I will leave too. But to end this war. He turned back to Steger. You're in command until I return. Steger saluted sharply. Yes, sir. McNulty and Sadie strode toward the hangar, leaving behind the quiet hum of officers already preparing for war. Reiser exhaled slowly, watching the map. The Tyrcol fleets continued their silent encirclement, and he knew that if he did not answer their call to the colonies, those colonies would burn. The Tyrcol thought they were laying a trap. They had no idea humanity was already setting their own. Jekyll stood at the center of the Calvexis's bridge, his stance rigid, his claws tapping against the haptic interface. The war room pulsed with the quiet efficiency of a fleet poised to strike. Through the viewport, a wall of Tyrcol dreadnoughts and battle cruisers loomed, their engines humming with restrained aggression. He turned sharply. Status report. A subordinate warrior straightened. The vanguard is in position. No resistance detected. Jekyll's mandibles clicked in irritation. Of course not. The humans cower behind their colonies, waiting to be swept aside. He stepped closer to the main display, red markers circling the outermost planets of the targeted system. No movement, no disruption. Pathetic. A transmission flickered to life. Vorka. Jekyll straightened. Jekyll! Vorka's voice carried through the bridge. Report. Jekyll bowed his head slightly, his mandibles twitching. Our forces stand ready. The noose tightens. There is no sign of their fleet. They will not resist. Vorka's eyes narrowed, unreadable. Then why do I sense hesitation? Jekyll stiffened. Only eagerness, Supreme Commander. Vorka studied him for a beat. Then, a slow, approving nod. This is your war, Jekyll. I chose you to lead the vanguard because you understand what is at stake. There is no surrender, no compromise. You know what must be done. Jekyll lifted his chin, his claws flexing. I will bring you their worlds, Supreme Commander. I will bring you their ashes. The transmission cut. Jekyll turned sharply, his eyes gleaming in anticipation. Advance the battle groups. No delays. No mercy. Across the bridge, orders were relayed. Engines burned hotter. The fleet pressed forward, unstoppable. The extermination was about to begin. Jekyll's crimson eyes flickered as he turned toward his second-in-command. What is the status of the encirclement? The officer, a younger warrior named Varric, straightened. The fleets are in position. No resistance. Their forces are still concentrated around their colony systems. They are either blind, or they are truly as weak as we have believed. Jekyll tilted his head, his ridged spine stiffening. Then the final extermination begins soon. Bring all battle groups forward. Varric nodded, moving toward the hollow interface to relay the orders, then hesitated. Jekyll's gaze snapped to him. What? The younger officer's talons twitched over the controls. Something is off. Jekyll stepped closer, his towering frame imposing. Explain. Varric navigated the hollow interface swiftly, bringing up fleet movement projections. According to initial intelligence, we should have already engaged defensive human forces. We expected them to fight immediately for their colonies. Yet, the only resistance we have met has been... He paused, eyes narrowing. Jekral's mandibles tightened. Speak. It's disorganized. Scatterings of resistance in isolated pockets, civilian ships moving erratically as if running, but no fleet formations. It's... Varric turned, his expression darkening. It's wrong. Jekral's mind calculated the variables rapidly. He turned toward the main battle interface, pulling up fleet scans of the colonies. He expected to see heavy human warships, defensive lines, perhaps even desperate counterattacks. Instead, there was nothing. No warships, no battle formations, just silence. Recalibrate all long-range scans, Jekral ordered. Find them. A silence fell over the bridge as officers worked quickly, their clawed fingers typing furiously over their panels. Then, one of the operators let out a sharp hiss. Commander, there are ships in the Theta Expanse. Jekral froze. His eyes darted to the display as it expanded, revealing new energy signatures flickering on the edges of the Tyrkal formation. At first they looked small, insignificant vessels moving without purpose. But then he saw it. They weren't moving randomly. They were circling, probing the Tyrkal fleet formations, slipping between blind spots. Jekral's blood ran hot. It's a feint. Before he could react, the first strike came. A massive detonation erupted from one of the secondary communication relays attached to a Tyrkal warship. The explosion rippled outward, severing linked data transmissions between fleets. A moment later, another shockwave detonated along the outer rim of the Tyrkal formations. The communications grid was being sabotaged. Jekral's talons clenched. Countermeasures! Now! He barked, but the damage was done. Confusion spread throughout the fleet. Some formations started shifting out of position, commanders struggling to reorganize without clear communication. Then came the next phase. Scattered among the distant asteroids and planetary debris fields, human strike groups emerged. Not in full-scale battle formations, but in small, tactical detachments. They moved like ghosts, striking hard and vanishing before retaliation. A squadron of stealth corvettes swept in from the gas clouds near the Kalreth corridor, unleashing a precision railgun barrage against the engines of a Tyrkal cruiser. The warship, caught mid-turn, veered off course, slamming into one of its own battle formations. From a barren moon in the Theta Expanse, concealed human artillery unleashed high-velocity kinetic rounds, tearing through Tyrkal destroyers before they could even pinpoint the attack origin. The Tyrkal expected a head-on war. The humans gave them chaos. Jekral slammed a fist into the command table. Where is their main fleet? No one could answer. The ambushes continued. Infiltrators among the fleeing civilian populations turned out to be saboteurs, detonating key supply depots before disappearing into the void. Unmanned relay drones, designed to mimic human fleet transmissions, broadcasted false signals, tricking Tyrkal forces into redeploying. Each strike was minor, but together they were unraveling the Tyrkal invasion plan. The encirclement was failing. Jekral's breathing became a slow, simmering rage. This was not a fluke. The humans were not running. They were hunting. Silence. All low-priority transmissions, he snapped. Pull all available sensor resources to track. Before he could finish, a hollow transmission flared to life. Vorka's face emerged, his predatory glare piercing through the screen. His tone was measured, but there was no mistaking the fury underneath. Jekral, Vorka said. Your sector reports instability. Jekral bowed his head slightly, though his mandibles twitched with barely contained frustration. The humans have begun tactical resistance. They are avoiding direct engagement. Instead, they are... I know what they are doing. Vorka's voice hissed, his eyes burned. And I do not accept excuses. Crush them. Jekral straightened. Yes, Supreme Commander. The transmission cut. Silence. Then Jekral turned, his voice cold as death itself. Redirect all fleet assets to signal tracking. I want their real fleet found. And once we do—" His claws scraped against the table, his eyes gleaming. "We will remind them that we are not prey." Yet, as his orders spread through the fleet, Jekyll missed something crucial. The humans were already ahead of them. They weren't reacting to the Tyrkol invasion. They were leading it exactly where they wanted it to go. Jekyll's claws dug into the command table, his eyes locked on the tactical display. The encirclement was failing. The humans had turned their defensive retreat into a ghost war, striking from nowhere, disrupting supply lines, sabotaging communications. But this was where it ended. He would reassert control. "Pull the dreadnoughts into formation," he snapped. "Sweep through the Theta expanse. Push them back." His officers moved swiftly, but the tension on the bridge was undeniable. Every attempt to lock down the humans' movements had failed. Every engagement ended with human warships vanishing into deep space before Tyrkol forces could fully react. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. A low chime rang through the war room. An officer straightened. "Commander, we're detecting human fleets on multiple vectors." Jekyll's mandibles clicked. "Finally! Where?" The display flickered. Then it lit up. Dozens of human signatures emerged at once, appearing along 3 separate systems. Jekyll's eyes widened. Impossible! For the first time, the humans were no longer hiding. They were attacking. The battle over the colony system of Halcyon Delta erupted in an instant. Human warships surged from hidden positions, some emerging from gas giants, others from low-orbit slingshots around moons. The Tyrkol formations, expecting a defensive stance, suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered and flanked. A trio of heavy UED battle cruisers, the Vermilion, Tartarus, and Warden, carved through the Tyrkol vanguard, their railguns shredding destroyers before they could react. The shockwave of their initial barrage sent Tyrkol formations into disarray, their captain scrambling to adapt. On the bridge of the Vermilion, Admiral Reiser stood firm. "Keep moving. We hit hard and we vanish. No prolonged engagements." "Confirmed," came the response from the fleet's secondary wing. Reiser's fleet executed the first phase perfectly. They weren't here to hold ground. They were here to cripple and disappear. Jekyll's fists slammed against the control panel. "Where did they come from?" His second-in-command, Varrock, was frantically scanning fleet logs. "They were already in position. They've been hiding right under us this entire time." Jekyll's rage burned. The humans had played him. "They're splitting into multiple strike groups," another officer reported. "They're not engaging in direct battles. They're cutting through logistics and command vessels." Jekyll bared his teeth. The humans weren't trying to win a battle. They were tearing apart the Tyrkol war machine. "Adaptive countermeasures, now!" Jekyll bellowed, but it was too late. Over Calreth Station, a Tyrkol command hub, the battle was over in minutes. A squadron of human stealth frigates launched a high-speed precision raid, targeting fuel depots and fleet coordination relays. Explosions rippled through the orbital station, blinding Tyrkol sensors. Before they could retaliate, the humans were already gone. The Tyrkol couldn't even hit back. At Theta Expanse, Tyrkol warships massed to counterattack, expecting a full engagement. But the moment they charged toward human forces, Reiser's secondary fleet vanished into deep space, leaving only wreckage and disrupted transmissions behind. Jekyll snarled, his claws scraping against the console. Where were they? Where was their main fleet? Every time he tried to force them into a real battle, they slipped away, leaving his forces crippled, exhausted, and bleeding. Jekyll's breath was ragged. He had one option left. He turned toward his communication officer. "Send an immediate transmission to Supreme Commander Vorka. We need reinforcements. Now." The bridge fell silent. The message was sent. Aboard the bridge of the Varkalos, Vorka stood motionless, his eyes locked on the flickering transmission. Jekyll's face was tight, his mandibles barely concealing the frustration beneath. "Supreme Commander," he said, his voice rigid. "The humans are not fighting like prey. They are hitting us and vanishing. We cannot—" He caught himself. "We must deploy our full strength now. Vorka's expression remained unreadable. The bridge was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of warship systems processing battlefield data. He exhaled slowly. Pull back. Jekral's mandibles twitched. Supreme Commander? Vorka's eyes burned cold. Fall back beyond the colony system's edge. Let the humans believe we are broken. Let them think we are running. He leaned forward slightly. Then, we return. And we end this. A tense pause. Then, Jekral straightened, nodding stiffly. Understood, Supreme Commander. The transmission cut. Vorka shifted his gaze toward the command interface before him. The Council. They had stalled long enough. His claws hovered over the encrypted relay, sending the signal. A moment later, the hollow feed flickered, and the Council chamber materialized before him. High Chancellor Vos Talvek sat in the speaker's seat, his luminous eyes unreadable as the assembled representatives turned their attention to the projection of Vorka. The time has come, Vorka said simply. Several delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Vos Talvek's voice was smooth. I assume you are not asking, Supreme Commander. Vorka's mandibles twitched. No. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, one by one, several factions signaled their compliance. The Suverek Union, bound to the Tirkol through backdoor trade agreements, pledged their forces. The Garzan, under threat of losing critical supply routes, fell in line. But not everyone complied. A Zendari representative, his iridescent skin shifting with irritation, leaned forward. This is reckless. The humans are not what you thought they were. You believe you can still crush them. I disagree. Vorka's gaze darkened. The Council cannot afford second-guessing, he growled. Stand with us, or be made irrelevant. The Zendari exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You never should have started this war. His voice was barely above a whisper. Vorka's mandibles clicked once. I will lead this war myself, he said, his tone final. Enough with this bullshit. The Zendari's gaze met his, a slow, deliberate nod. Good luck with that. Vorka's eyes burned as the transmission cut. He stood alone on the bridge of his dreadnought, staring into the abyss of deep space. The humans had humiliated them, but that was about to change. The Varkalos, Vorka's personal dreadnought, emerged from the void like a celestial predator. Its twin prows, resembling the curved talons of a great beast, reflected the dim starlight as it pierced through the system's gravity well, leading the reassembled Tirkal armada. Behind it, an entire fleet surged forward, no longer fragmented, no longer caught in the humans' ambush tactics. The full force of the Tirkal Empire was now in play. On the bridge, Vorka stood at the helm, towering, still, a presence that exuded absolute command. His mandibles flexed in restrained fury as his eyes swept across the battle-worn remnants of Jekral's vanguard. Damaged warships, crippled formations, and the absence of their previous confidence painted a picture of humiliation. But that would change now. He activated the fleet-wide channel. The projection of his formidable figure materialized across every remaining Tirkol warship, his deep, guttural voice reverberating with raw authority. This war ends now. His tone resolute, absolute. The humans believe themselves clever. They believe they have outmaneuvered us. His mandibles clicked, his next words laced with disdain. But they have only delayed their extermination. Behind him, additional ships surged into formation, the reinforcements promised by his council allies. Garzan battle cruisers, Suverek support frigates, and mercenary detachments gathered, their engines burning with new resolve. The fleet had just doubled in size. This is the hour of victory, Vorka continued, his crimson eyes burning. Their colonies fall today. The last of their fleets break against our might. And when the dust settles, he exhaled slowly. The name human will be spoken only in whispers, as a cautionary tale of those who dared defy the Tirkol. A chorus of war cries erupted across the comm channels as the Tyrcol fleet surged forward, a singular force of destruction. Aboard the bridge of the Vermilion, Admiral Reiser stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the holomap. The Tyrcol fleet loomed over the projection, advancing toward the colonies in a relentless tide of destruction. A voice crackled through the secure command line. Elwes, speaking from Cydonia Command Center. Their reinforcements arrived faster than expected, Elwes reported, scanning energy signatures. Their numbers just doubled. Reiser exhaled. Good. A pause. Then, Elwes frowned. Sir? Reiser's gaze didn't waver. If they're committing everything now, they won't have time to reconsider when it's too late. Before Elwes could respond, a secondary transmission cut through the bridge's main frequency. A colonial leader's insignia flashed across the display. Governor Callum Jareth of Hesperia, one of the largest human settlements in the sector. His rough, scarred features filled the screen. Behind him, officers moved rapidly, not evacuating, but preparing. His expression was not one of fear. It was one of resolve. Admiral, Jareth said, his voice steady. We've seen the fleet reports. We know what's coming. Reiser folded his arms. Then you know you should be evacuating, Governor. Jareth shook his head. With all due respect, sir, we will not run. Another signal lit up. More colonial leaders appeared on the transmission. Representatives from Halcyon Delta, Jericho's Landing, Kalor Outpost. All of them armed, all of them ready. Jareth continued, his voice firm. We've already mobilized everything we've got. Orbital platforms, strike craft, artillery platforms. We're integrating our forces with yours. Whatever ships we have, they're under your command now. Reiser's expression remained unreadable. You understand what that means? Jareth nodded. It means that nothing that belongs to the Tyrcol touches our ground. They die before they land. A silence stretched across the bridge. Then, Reiser smirked. I see, he murmured. Welcome aboard, my friends. Across the fleet, officers relayed new battlefield parameters. Colony defense systems synchronized with UED fleet formations. On the far edge of the system, the enemy prepared its own answer. The Tyrcol fleet loomed over the Hesperia colony system, its crimson hulls reflecting the cold light of the sector's pale blue star. Aboard his flagship, Jekral stood rigid, mandibles clenched, watching as his war-torn fleet reassembled into proper battle formations. The arrival of the Supreme Commander had changed everything. A bridge officer snapped to attention, his posture stiffening. Supreme Commander, we are detecting energy spikes from the colonies. Vorka narrowed his eyes. Human defenses? Yes, but it's not just orbital stations. We're detecting massive artillery deployments, fighter squadrons mobilizing, and colony-wide shield activations. Jekral frowned. They know they can't win in space. They're preparing for a prolonged ground resistance. Vorka's mandibles pulled back in a slow, barbed smirk. First, we crush them in space. Then we burn what remains. They will not have a home to defend. The order was given. Admiral Reiser watched from the command deck of the Vermilion as the Tyrcol fleet spread across the battlefield. The final phase was about to begin. His comm officer turned. Sir, Vorka is broadcasting. Reiser's lips pressed into a thin line. Let's hear it. The Tyrcol leader's voice cut through every frequency, his tone filled with cruel confidence. The time for your desperate little tricks is over, humans, Vorka sneered. Now you will witness what true power is. There will be no escape, no survival, only the ashes of your worlds. Reiser let the silence linger for a second before responding. Supreme Commander, he said, his tone calm, almost casual. I've been waiting for you. Vorka's expression twisted slightly at the lack of fear in the human's voice. Reiser turned to his bridge crew. Begin. Across the battlefield, hidden subspace relay stations activated, and then the human fleet emerged. From behind Hesperia's outer gas giant, from within the asteroid belts, from low orbit of other colony worlds, the full strength of the UED materialized, weapons primed, warships unfolding into deadly formations. Vorka stared, mandibles twisting. A trap. No, an illusion of one. The battlefield ignited. Vorka watched from the Varkalos, his dreadnought a monolith of destruction at the heart of the Tyrkol armada. The human fleet had revealed itself, emerging from its hiding places across Hesperia's outer gas giant and asteroid belts, but it was still outnumbered 2-1. It didn't matter if they had been clever so far. This was war, and war was won with brute force. He raised a clawed hand. All ships, advance. Tyrkol warships surged forward, a crimson tide of destruction, their broadside plasma cannons unleashing the first volley of annihilation. Aboard the Vermilion, Reiser's eyes flicked across the holomap as the Tyrkol battle line closed in fast. He had anticipated this, but the sheer force of it still threatened to crush them. Colony defenses and fleet coordination had to hold. Now, hit them with everything, he ordered. The human fleet split into 3 formations, each executing precision maneuvers to break the impact of the Tyrkol charge. Corvettes and frigates darted between the enemy capital ships, releasing targeted EMP strikes that disrupted Tyrkol tracking systems. The Vermilion, along with its sister ships Tartarus and Warden, held the center line, engaging directly with Tyrkol dreadnoughts, exchanging brutal volleys of railgun rounds and plasma lances. The Tyrkol fleet pushed forward, using its overwhelming firepower to smash through human defensive lines. The Varkalos, leading the assault, fired its main cannon, a superheated energy lance that ripped through 3 UED destroyers in a single shot. The bridge of the Vermilion shook violently. Warning klaxons blared. Direct hit to the Argenti division. They've lost their flagship. Reiser's grip tightened. The Varkalos' main weapon was too powerful, and it had just carved a hole through their formation. He turned sharply. Keep moving. Don't give them a stationary target. The Tyrkol pressed harder, convinced they had shattered the human lines. Then they noticed. Vorka's eyes narrowed. The humans weren't breaking. They weren't retreating. They were holding. Vorka's command display flickered as multiple unexpected signals appeared. Dozens of small attack groups emerging from the planet's orbital platforms, from deep space relay stations, from civilian convoys that had been disguised as refugees. Tyrkol battle formations began to fragment. Their lines forced apart as the sudden counterattack disrupted their coordination. Aboard the Tyrkol dreadnought Colvexus, Commander Jekyll snarled as his ship rocked violently, targeted by what should have been defenseless civilians. They are fighting back! One of his officers turned, panic creeping into his voice. Sir, they're cutting into our supply lines. We can't hold position like this. Jekyll slammed a fist into the console. This was supposed to be a culling, not a battle. Reiser watched from the command deck, waiting for the Tyrkol to overextend. He knew Vorka would rely on the sheer strength of his dreadnought to force the final blow. That was the mistake. Prepare the second phase, Reiser ordered. Across the battlefield, hidden UED reserve forces began their advance. These weren't warships. These were old civilian vessels retrofitted for combat, coming in from behind the Tyrkol lines. The colonists had turned their supply freighters, their transports, their industrial ships into war machines. They weren't fleet caliber, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to be in the way. Tyrkol battle cruisers collided with suddenly appearing ships, their lines grinding to a halt as small, maneuverable vessels weaved between them, blocking their movement. Tyrkol ships began to panic fire, destroying their own vessels as the battlefield collapsed into chaos. Vorka's nostrils flared wide in rage. Burn them all! He turned to his weapons officer, his eyes wild with fury. Fire the main cannon again! The Varkalos' power core surged, preparing to unleash another catastrophic lance of energy. But Reiser had been waiting for this. Now, he said. From behind Hesperia's largest moon, a massive warship emerged. Ancient, battle-scarred. A relic of wars long past, the UED Harbinger. Its hull was pockmarked with age, its engines reinforced with outdated plating. It had been mothballed decades ago, a forgotten monument to human defiance, and now it was coming straight for Vorka's dreadnought. A hushed silence fell over the Varkalos' bridge as the monstrous human warship entered the battlefield. Vorka's lips curled in amusement. He let out a low, guttural laugh. "That's what you send against me?" Jekral's claws twitched. "Supreme Commander, that ship is too large to maneuver effectively. It's..." Vorka grinned. "Then we crush it. Prepare the main cannon." The weapons officer nodded, initiating the charging sequence. The Varkalos' forward prongs split open, gathering massive amounts of energy, preparing to end the battle in one decisive strike. Vorka leaned forward. His eyes gleamed. "This ends now." The Varkalos' weapon systems roared to life. Vorka stood at the helm, his crimson eyes gleaming as the energy core surged, channeling power into the main cannon. The massive prongs at the front of the Tirkal dreadnought split apart, revealing the unstable gravitational core that would condense energy into a single, obliterating strike. Across the battlefield, human forces pulled back, their formation shifting like a tide receding before the coming storm. The Harbinger, the ancient warship Vorka had dismissed, loomed ahead, its battle-scarred hull drifting motionless. Aboard the Kalvexis, Jekral watched the transmission from the Varkalos, tension coiled within his frame. His rigid exoskeleton barely concealed the unease creeping through his core. Something was wrong. From his command station, he observed the Varkalos' main cannon charging, preparing to obliterate the Harbinger. Everything seemed under control, and yet, strange. "Supreme Commander," he growled, "that ship, it's moving but it's not changing course. No evasive maneuvers, no weapons online. Something isn't right." Vorka scoffed. A relic, an empty shell. His mandibles twitched with amusement. They brought a corpse to a war. Aboard the Vermilion, Admiral Reiser watched the Tirkal dreadnought's weapon systems surge to life. Vorka had taken the bait. Reiser murmured to himself, his hands tightening behind his back. "That's it." He turned to his tactical officers, his voice calm, firm. "All warships, prepare to fire the moment they expend their shot. That's your only mission right now." A ripple of confirmations echoed across the fleet. Human warships adjusted their firing trajectories, locking onto the Varkalos while still fighting. The trap was set. The charge reached full power. The Varkalos' targeting systems locked onto the Harbinger. "Fire!" Vorka roared, proud of himself. A pulse of raw, searing energy erupted from the dreadnought, lancing across the void in a beam of impossible destruction. The impact tore through the Harbinger's hull, splitting it in two. Everything caught in its path was vaporized instantly. Molten fragments scattered like a dying star, debris cascading into the planet's orbit. For a fraction of a second, silence reigned. Then, the entire human fleet moved at once. From every direction, warships opened fire, their coordinated assault raining down on the Varkalos like a controlled detonation of celestial fury. Dozens of railguns, torpedoes, and kinetic lances converged, their impacts tearing through the dreadnought's hull before its shields could recover from the energy expenditure. Vorka's eyes widened. It was a trap. The Harbinger had been empty, a decoy, and now he was exposed. The Tirkal dreadnought rocked violently as explosions erupted along its spine, shredding armor plating and gutting its power relays. Smoke and flame billowed from its lower decks, entire sections of the ship collapsing as chain detonations spread through its structure. Jekral stumbled back, his claws gripping the control panel. "We need to..." A final barrage struck the core reactor. The Varkalos detonated. A violent shockwave consumed the bridge. Flames engulfed Vorka's vision. The last thing he saw was the void swallowing him whole. The Tirkal fleet was in chaos. Jekral's transmission cut out the moment the Varkalos exploded. Command chains shattered. Warships faltered, their formations crumbling as panic spread through their ranks. On the Vermilion, Admiral Reiser stood unmoving, watching as the Tiercall flagship disintegrated into fire and debris. His voice was steady when he spoke. "Send the message." A tactical officer nodded, relaying the broadcast to every remaining Tiercall vessel. "This is Admiral Reiser, representing all of humanity in this war. Your Supreme Commander is dead. Your flagship is destroyed. Your Empire's ambition ends today. Stand down, leave this system, and withdraw from the Galactic Council permanently. If you refuse, you die here." Silence followed. Across the battlefield, transmissions flared as the allies of the Tiercall Empire sent their messages to the Vermilion. "We are withdrawing. Our fleets are departing. We are no longer part of this conflict." Reiser exhaled, watching the transmission logs. The Tiercall were alone now, but then a single transmission cut through the silence, raw with defiance. The holoscreen flickered, revealing a face twisted in rage. "This is Commander Jekral of the Calvexus." His voice was guttural, his mandibles pulled back in a snarl of pure hatred. "Tiercall do not surrender." The bridge of the Vermilion fell silent. Reiser stared at the screen, unshaken. Jekral's eyes burned. "You will never break us." His voice was raw, venomous. "Not today. Not ever." The Calvexus surged forward, its engines blazing, weapons firing wildly as it led a final suicidal charge. A handful of Tiercall ships followed, remnants of Vorka's most devout warriors, loyal to the very end. Reiser did not speak. He didn't have to. The human fleet reacted as one. A wave of kinetic projectiles, torpedoes, and lances erupted toward the charging ships. Jekral's war cry was drowned out as the Calvexus was obliterated mid-flight, torn apart in a cascade of molten wreckage before it could reach the Vermilion. The last of Vorka's warriors died without ever touching their enemy. Silence. The remaining Tiercall ships hesitated. Then, another transmission. A different Tiercall commander appeared on screen. He didn't bother with a name, nor did he offer a title. There was nothing left to command. His tone was resigned, his face unreadable. "The humans have proven their point." A pause. "We are leaving." And one by one, they did. The last remnants of the Tiercall fleet fled the system, their once unstoppable invasion force now a tattered shadow of its former self. Then Admiral Reiser turned to his comms officer. "Get me the Chancellor." A moment later, McNulty's face appeared on screen, his expression unreadable. "It's over," Reiser said simply. McNulty nodded once. "Good." Right after, the chamber doors parted. McNulty stepped inside, his pace measured, deliberate. The hum of quiet whispers filled the air as the gathered representatives turned, their faces twisted in shock, disbelief, and fear. The Tiercall seat was empty. Their influence was broken. McNulty's gaze swept the room before settling on High Chancellor Vos Talvek, whose luminous green eyes were shadowed with unspoken realization. He exhaled, his voice steady. "As I'm sure you all have heard, Vorka no longer exists." He let the words settle, the weight of them pressing against the silence. "But we still have unfinished matters to discuss." Talvek straightened, attempting to mask his unease. His voice was smooth, calculating. "You presume too much, Chancellor McNulty. This council does not bow to the whims of—" McNulty cut him off, his voice calm but absolute. "The Tiercall thought they ruled this council. That time is over." His gaze burned through the room. "Now it's our turn." Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing. Every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here. or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.